Good evening. Maseches Moed Kattan Daf Chavav. Lots of words. It's actually fairly halachic, even though it appears to be quite agadic. There's both, but we're going to dig in. We're at the very last words on Chav Hey Amud Beis Tanu Rabbanan. The rabbis teach us in a brisa as follows: top of Chavav Amud Aleph. Ve'elu keroin she'en misachin. The following kriyas that are done for avelus, they're ein misachin. They can never be fully fixed. We discussed the distinction between a partial fix, which is called sholelin, and that would be as opposed to a fix called misachin, where it is back to normal. So remember, of course, that we have plenty of pairs of clothes. Someone just last week told me they tore their shirt and they were either going to throw it out or fix it. But I'm like, but you can't wear it. It doesn't look nice, right? We wouldn't do that. If, like, let's say the elbow of our shirts would tear, okay, it's time, just throw it out. Like, but back in the day, they didn't have enough money. So there's a difference between being sholel, which is a temporary fix, and being misachin, which is a permanent fix. So this is what the Gemara is discussing, is about which cases do we not allow for misachin. Ve'elu krayin she'en misachin, top line chavav amud aleph, hakorei al avi ve'al imo. We've learned about this already. The kriya that one does over a parent that can never be fixed. Ve'al rabo shalim de Torah, on the rabbi who taught that person Torah. Ve'al nasi ve'al bezdin, on those two significant roles in the community. Ve'al shmuos ros, on terrible things that are heard about that happen to Jews. Ve'al birkas Hashem, of course, speaking derech sagi nahor about birkas Hashem, when one Rachmana litzlan curses Hashem. Ve'al sefer Torah shenisraf, if God forbid a sefer Torah is burned or destroyed. Ve'al are Yehuda, ve'al hamikdash ve'al Yerushalayim, and of course on the hills of Yehuda, on the city of Yehuda, on the mikdash and on Yerushalayim. Famous halachos and quoted in Shulchan Aruch Taf Kuf Samech, that when one goes to Yerushalayim, they should tear kriya. So people try to do this whole chaperein that if I'm going to borrow your shirt, we'll discuss that a little bit today. Really, that's not appropriate. You're supposed to tear kriya. That's a din. You can choose what shirt you tear. You don't have to bring your expensive shirt, but you should tear kriya when you go to Yerushalayim. It's every 30 days. And the brisa concludes v'kareh al mikdash umosif al Yerushalayim, that one can tear on the mikdash, and then they can do an additional tear, meaning not a separate tear, for seeing the city of Yerushalayim. There's a little bit of a logistical difficulty. How do you first see the mikdash without seeing Yerushalayim? A little bit of a funny story. I don't know. Maybe you're living underground, or your apartment is there, and you don't helicopter tours. The example I heard in a shiur was you're in a car that you can't see out the windows, and they drive up to the Kosel Mamish. And okay, there's scenarios, but on its face, it's a difficult scenario to consider. All right, let's dig in. Says the Gemara, trying to explain the brisa, 7-8 lines down. Avi ve'imo ve'rabo shalim de Torah minolam. How do we know that we are not allowed to fix the tears, the kriya that's done over these people, on a mother, father, and on a rebbe? Says the Gemara, Dichsiv ve'alisha ra. He saw, what did he see? He saw that Eliyahu Hanavi was going up to Shamayim. Vehu mitzaek avi, my father, rechev Yisraelu parashav. And how do we understand this pasuk? Avi ze avi ve'imo. It's a reference to a mother and a father that we're not allowed to fix the kriya that we tore on their passings. Rechev Yisrael parashav ze rabo shalim de Torah. And how do we understand from the pasuk that rechev parashav, that this pasuk has any reference to a rebbe? It doesn't say anything about that. Says the Gemara, interestingly, it's not even on the words rechev Yisrael parashav, which is what it seems. My mashma kedim etargem Rabbi Yosef. The whole pasuk is understood as follows. Rebbe. That's how the Targum understands avi. The tov lahon Yisrael bitzlusei. It was good for the Jews what he did, what Eliyahu did with his prayers, more than merisichin uparoshin, more than horses and chariots. That always should be our hashkafa and tefillah. It shouldn't be unique to Eliyahu Hanavi. It's just a lofty level. We always have this misnomer that our hishtadlus is what matters. You have to do ishtadlus, but that's not the goreim. That's not midah keneged midah. That's not how it works. What a Kadosh Baruch Hu is gozer, that's what happens. If a Kadosh Baruch Hu is gozer that a person is going to make $50,000 this year, that's what's going to happen, one way or the other, by loss, by gain. It doesn't matter. All the numbers will even out. How do we know that when it comes to a father, to a mother, and to a rebbe that we cannot heal these tears? Says the Gemara, we saw this already. Why does the pasuk say that it's two? When you tear something, it becomes into two. It says the Gemara, because that's extraneous. Therefore, it has to stay torn forever. Because of the extra word shnaim, we don't really need it. We're adding the extra word shnaim to show us that it has to be like that forever. Amar le Reish Lakish, the Rabbi Yochanan, just a question on the story. Eliyahu Chayhu, he wasn't dead in that story. He went up to Shamayim. Again, we don't, this is already above our pay grade, but he went up to Shamayim, but he wasn't dead. So Amar le, no, that's not really a good question. That was the last time that he saw him. So let's say, I'm just jumping off the page. Let's say you know that you're never going to see someone again. You tear kriya at that moment. That's implied from the Gemara that he knew that he wasn't going to see Eliyahu again, and he tore kriya. So the Gemara doesn't say this, and I didn't look into any of the Rishonim here, but it's an interesting question to make a diuk from. It's not even a diuk; it's what seems to be the case. That's what the Gemara says. The Legabe didei kimeistam, because he knew he would never see him again. Nasi v'av bezdin ushmuos ros. Let's go back to the brisa and analyze. How do we know that a nasi and an av bezdin, if they die, or if there are shmuos ros that we hear terrible things that happen, how do we know minalan that we are obligated to tear kriya? David grabbed onto his clothes and he tore them. So did everyone around him. They gave hespedim, they gave eulogies, and they cried. And they fasted until night. Al Shaul al Yehonasan beno, on Shaul and his son Yehonasan, al Am Hashem al Beis Yisrael kinaflu becharev. Shaul, let's make some diukim from the pasuk. Shaul is a nasi. A nasi is similar to a melech, and Shaul is a melech. Yehonasan ze abbez, and he was a big Talmud Chacham, so we're equating him to an abbez, and first of the very long lines. Alam Hashem al Beis Yisrael elu shmos haros. These are the bad things that happen. Amar le Rav Bar Shiva Rav Kahana ve'ema ad havukulu. Maybe we would say that the only time we have a scenario where you're not allowed to fix the kera is where you're tearing over all three of them simultaneously, not each individually, not the nasi or the abbezdin or shmos ros, but all of them together. Says the Gemara. No, the pasuk doesn't say that way. The pasuk says Amrle al hifsi ka'inyan. The word al, if you look back up 2-3 lines, what does the pasuk say? Al Yehona. It says al Shaul ve'al Yehona san beno ve'al Am Hashem ve'al Beis Yisrael. So we see from here that the Am Hashem, all the words were separated with the word al, thereby indicating that the operator that goes between each of these phrases is not nasi and avbezdin and bad shmos, but it's or. It's any of them. Any one of them will generate a scenario where one would not be allowed to fix the kriya that they've done. We're 2 lines into the wide lines on Chavav Amud Aleph, halfway down. Not halfway in words, that's for sure, but halfway in height. Says the Gemara, is it in fact correct that we tear kriya for bad things that we hear? The story was told to Shmuel. Katar Shvor Malka. Shvor Malka was one of the kings of Persia, and he killed Tresar Alpha Yehudai in the city of Bimzigas Kesari. 12,000 Jews were killed in the city. It was just astronomical numbers. It says the Gemara, Velo Kara, and he didn't tear kriya. So you wanted to tell me in the Bryce at the top of the page that Shmuel's Ros we tear kriya, but Shmuel didn't tear kriya. So says the Gemara, Lo Amru Ela Berov Tzibor Uchmaisa Shahaya. The only time that the kriya is torn is when it's Rov Tzibor Uchmaisa Shahaya, the story with David and Yehonasan and all the people that were killed. The Ritva here and other Rishonim have a very hard time with this Gemara because that implies that Rov of the Tzibor was killed at that time, which isn't historically accurate. So the Gemara says, were we talking about one Shevet? Were we talking about Rov of the people were present or alive during the time when one Shevet was killed or half of a Shevet? It's definitely not half of Klal Yisrael. That would have had much more real estate. We would have had more clarity with that. So here when it says Berov Tzibor, it doesn't actually mean that Rov of all of the Tzibor was, but maybe a Rov of a smaller grouping of a Shevet or whatever it may be. The Ramban's approach here is the approach that there were just a lot of Jews around. Rov of the Jews saw what happened. Again, just various approaches, but certainly not 51%. The Gemara questions the story. The Gemara just said that Shvor Malka killed 12,000 people. The Gemara says 4 lines into the wide lines, Shvor Malka Yehudai, did he actually kill Jews? Shvor Malka l'Shmuel. Shvor Malka said to Shmuel, Teisili, I should be rewarded. To look at the Yehudim me'olam. He said it as an accolade of himself that he never killed a Jew. So what's with the story that he killed 12,000 Jews? Says the Gemara, Hasam inhu garme lenafshahu. They, the Jews at that time, the 12,000, they brought it upon themselves. To Amar Rabbi Ami, lekol yasire, with the sound of the harps, de Mzigas Kesari, that the sounds that happened in the city of Mzigas Kesari, pakashur de Ludkia, that led to the breaking down of the walls of the Ludkia. They were playing music as they were rebelling against the king, and because they were doing that, that therefore led to their death, their demise, because they were being disrespectful, as it were, during their rebellion. How do we know that if one curses a Kadosh Baruch Hu, that we cannot tear we cannot re-tear that kriya? Sorry, I should say. Let me ask that question. That they're obligated in kriya, but
would be re-tear, not re-tear.
Well, that's Correct, but that's not even what the Gemara is asking about. How do we know that we're chayiv in kriya is what the Gemara is asking. Al birkas, I said the whole thing was wrong twice over. You're correct. So al birkas Hashem inolan, 6 lines into the wide lines. How do we know that with birkas Hashem, with cursing Hashem, there's a chiyuv kriya? Dichsiv, the pasuk says, "Vayavu el Yakim ben Chilkiah asher al habayis v'shavna hasofer v'yoach ben Asaf hamasker Chizkiyahu kruv begadim." A scenario of birkas Hashem happened before, and they showed up with kruv begadim, that they were torn clothes. So we see from here that one's obligated to tear kriya if there's birkas Hashem. What are the parameters of this? Not so simple. Birkas Hashem. A lot of people are blasphemous. We hear things all the time. On the news and on TV, we hear it all the time. You hear people saying it in shul. Sometimes you hear crazy things when people say crazy things. A Rebbe called me last week to tell me that they had a Talmud who said something very dramatic, that they hate Yiddishkeit. Is that blasphemy? It's not blasphemy. The Talmud's a kid. That's not blasphemy. They're not a chacham enough to know what blasphemy is. You can't be a blasphemer if you're an Amoritz. You have to be a something before you could say that the Torah is a nothing. You can't just say that, I don't like it. What do you know? You're total Amoritz. Good. So that's what the pasuk says, where the Gemara says 6, 7, 8 lines into the wide lines, Tanu Rabbanon, Echad Hashomeya. If you hear it directly, that's what we were discussing about Shmuel's Rose. Not only that, Echad Hashomeya mipi Hashomeya, or if you heard it from the messenger. So then, under those circumstances, Chayav Likro, that's one derivative out, right? So it's 1 degree of separation. You're still obligated to tear kriya on Shmuel's Rose. The Eidim, but the people, it's like the horse rider who's walking around and saying terrible things have happened. They don't have to tear kriya every time they say it. They don't have to tear because they already heard it. And every time they're the ones saying it, they're not hearing it. They already heard it. Their hearing is over. So says the Gemara, hold on one second. Who cares? They're repeating it again. They're hearing it again. Says the Gemara, that's not the pshat in the pasuk. Those lo sal kadaitach. After all, only the king did the kriya when he heard what the avodim said, but they did not do the kriya. So the pshat in the pasuk is not that way. How do we know that when it comes to these shmuos that we're not allowed to repair them? Asya kriya kriya. We have a pasuk of kriya over here. We have the pasuk of kriya that we learned at the top of the page. Sefer Torah shenisraf minal. And how do we know the halachos of a sefer Torah that Rahman al-Islan is burned? Yehudi shalosh dalsos ve'arba. We don't know what that means. Dalsos in this context means psukim. 3 psukim or 3 chapters and 4. We'll discuss this in a minute what the Gemara means. By kareha b'sa'ar, it was cut out with a razor, hasofer, from a sofer. B'hashlech el ha'esh, it was put in the fire. Sherlo ha'ach v'gom. So what does this mean? What's pshat in the pasuk? Remember, we're trying to figure out how do we know that there are halachos of kriya when a sefer Torah is nisra. Says the Gemara 2/3 of the way down. My shalosh dalsos v'arba. What does it mean when it says that there are 3 chapters or 4? Amru lola Yehoyakim. Cost of Yirmiyah Sefer Kinos. They told Yehoyakim, this was before the Churban, that parts of Eicha were already written. Sefer Kinos, 3 out of 4. Shalosh Dalsos Arba. So that we showed him here, right? We're talking about Eicha Perak Aleph, Beis, and Dalet. Those 3 prakim were written pre-Churban. Okay, that's an important piece here. Omar Yehoyakim said, Omar Lahu, he said to the people, Maksiv Bey. What did Yirmiyahu write in this book that he wrote in Eicha? Says the Gemara, Eicha Yashva Badad. Yerushalayim is going to be all lonesome. Amar Lahu Anamalka. I'm the king right now. What are you worried about? It's not going to be like that. I'm going to take care of you. So Amar Lei, and then they said, well, it also says Bachotiv Kebalayla, that they're going to be crying in the night, destruction of Yerushalayim. Anamalka, he says, what, guys, I'm in charge. I got your back. Everything is good, said Yehoyakim. Galsa Yehudi Meoni. The Yehuda, the Judeans are going to be exiled. Anamalka, don't worry. Darchet Tzion Avelos. There's going to be mourning in Tzion. Anamalka, don't worry. There's going to be a king in your place who's not Jewish. Oh, that one got under the skin because they said to Yehoyakim, you're not going to be the king forever. There's going to be a goy who overtakes Yerushalayim. So Amar Lahu Man Amar, who says this? So you see the people who were his messengers said back it's from a pasuk, that Yerushalayim is going to be punished based on the rebelliousness of the people who are the inhabitants of Yerushalayim. Miyad immediately Kadar Kol Azkaros Sheba, he cut out all of the references of Hashem, the Sarfan Ba'esh from Eicha. He cut them out and he threw them into fire. The people were not afraid and they didn't tear their clothes. What does that imply? That when you tear Hashem's name out of a book, you do need to tear Kriya. Now, a Sefer Torah is really not identical to this case, and the Mefarshim pick up on this, but it's close enough that we say that there is a din. First of all, it's Eicha, and Divrei Torah and Divrei Kabbalah lo yalfina. You can't really learn a perfect match from something that's rabbinic in nature. Hafalpi that it's divine, but nach is nach and Torah is Torah. There's just not the same thing. So even though they were written with divinity, this is one of the sharp contrasts of the New Testament, kaviyachal, a billion times over to the Old Testament. So we believe in the 24 books of the canon. We say the first 5 are Moshe, and from book number 6, which is Yoshua, up to Divrei Yam, those are an extra 19 books. All of them are included in the canon and divine. But if you look in the literature about the New Testament, even the authors of the New Testament will tell you that it was written for the sake of for people to hear, for people to be inspired. Chumash is not written that way. Chumash is written. These are gzeros min hashamayim. We keep them because the Kodesh Baruch Hu told us to keep them. Fine. That's neither here or there for now. But that's what the Gemara says. Michlal debo l'mikra. We're halfway through the very wide lines. Maybe we should say that this is talking about Shmuos Ros, because what did the Psukim say? And all the other terrible things that Eicha said. Maybe they weren't Terek Kriya because he cut out Hashem's name from the Psukim. Maybe he was doing it because at the end of the day, look at these terrible things that Eicha said was going to happen, that Yirmiyahu wrote about. He was basically writing Kinos before, not basically, he wrote Eicha before the Churban happened. So we're talking about all the Shmuos Ros. So say that it's because of the Shmuos Ros that we have to tear Kriya. It's not because of that. It says, you can't say that because it was a prophecy. Amar le Shmuos Ros, it was prophetic, but it hadn't happened yet. It still hadn't happened. It wasn't Nevuah. So you can't say it's Shmuos Ros on the future, so we're tearing Kriya now. It hasn't happened yet. So therefore, the Gemara says we don't tear Kriya because of that. It has to be from the fact that he cut out the psukim. If a person, Rachmana litzlan, sees a Sefer Torah tear, chayav likra shtei kriyos. One is obligated to tear 2 kriyos. Echad al gvil. One is on the parchment, the echad al ksab, and one is on the lettering. Of course, this doesn't apply if it tears on a seam, but if God forbid, like it's hard to imagine. I've never seen it. Has anyone never seen a Sefer Torah tear? I've never seen one. So thank God the parchment that we have is really pretty thick. Whatever the measurements are, I don't know, but it's pretty thick. And if it were to tear and not tear on a seam, so then in theory one would have to tear 2 kriyas according to this Gemara. I presume this is. Let me see if this quoted in Shulchan. What? You can't tear on Shabbos. You can't tear kriya on Shabbos. Not even for a parent. We don't do burial. That's not even if the death happened at that time. Doesn't matter. You can't do anything.
No, I'm saying like the bottom of the page, with the bottom of it.
Oh, right. It has to go into the letters. Yeah, it has to make a Sefer Torah puzzle in that way. It has to go all the way up until. I presume. I'm not. Yeah, my rule still stands. I'm no posing. What?
Does that mean you have to tear 2 shirts, or you just tear the one shirt twice as big?
We'll learn that a little bit later, but probably the way that it is 1 tefach and then another mashu. Just a small amount. That's how the Gemara paskins when we have multiple cases. We'll see shortly. Fine. So it says the Gemara, you have to tear 2. Okay. Shnei Amar, as the pasuk says, Acharei Sof HaMelech Asa Megillah, when he burned the Megillah, and then later Ve'es HaDvarim, he burned the scroll and the word. So we see the pasuk itself separates these things. This pasuk is speaking about from Yirmiyahu as well. But next, Rabbi Abba, story time. Rabbi Abba v'Rav Huna Barchia Havu Yasve. They were sitting and talking and learning. And Kame de Rabbi, it should become Rabbi Abba and Boy Lafnuye. Rabbi Abba got up, he had to go Lafnuye, he had to go to the bathroom. So Allah Chalamaisa Shakle Letotafte, he took off his tefillin, and Achse Be Saja, Abe Saja, and he put it down on a pillow. This is a Shiloh and poskim, whether or not you're Ab. My son just asked me this question, my bar mitzvah son Elisha. He said to me, I have to go to the bathroom. Should I make another bracha on my tefillin? So the standard answer is yes. He's like, but Abba, I learned that there's a chakira, that if the person is just going to be urinating, then there's no need to make a new bracha. Because maybe Ladina, especially in our bathrooms, which are not real bathrooms from the times of the Gemara, the Beis HaKisei Shel Parsim, ours are much cleaner. They don't smell good after a while. But still, there's no... assuming people do their responsibilities and flush the toilet, okay, then there should be nothing there. So the poskim say that when it comes to someone who just urinates, since technically speaking, you could have worn your tefillin into the bathroom, you didn't, it's covered, but you could have. So some poskim say that you're not obligated to make a new bracha on tefillin if you go to the bathroom. Anyways, the Gemara is not dealing with this issue, but it's an important halacha to discuss. So shakle letotafte, you put it on a beis saja. Asya bas na'amisa. This happens all the time. An ostrich was walking down the street, and and the ostrich was hungry. What does he know? He sees what looks like a piece of leather, maybe he smelled it. He wanted to swallow it. Omar, it didn't end up happening. They stopped it from happening. But Hashta, had it been the case, I would have had to tear 2 kriyos, an extension of the din that we just saw, that it's parchment and it's letters. So there's a reason to say that you're chayiv to tear kriya twice. Omar le'menolacha, where did you get that from? After all, he says, that's not how I learned. I had a similar story. They asked this child to Rav Masna, there was an animal that was going to eat my tefillin as to whether or not I had to tear 2 kriyos. So I asked Rav Masna, he didn't know the answer. Then we went in front of Rabbi Yehuda and asked him the shaila. It's only true when someone is doing something with your tefillin, like in a bizayon type of way with a strong hand. Let's say someone says that guy's a Jew, burning his tefillin. Then you have to be chayiv shtei kriyos. But if the way it's happening is because of an ostrich or because of an ones, it just fell in the water. It happened to my brother Avi. His tefillin was in a waterproof bag when he was in Eretz Yisrael for his year. So everyone in Hakotel, this is pre-Nativ Aryeh days, a long time ago. So he was walking through the water and it wasn't as airtight and his tefillin got ruined, taka. So there, you're not chayiv to tear shtei kriyos. That's not the case. It's only when it's done with lahachis, when someone is out to get you. Bizra, uchemaisa shahaya. That would have been the case with Yehoyakim, but otherwise, that's not the case. Says the Gemara, Are Yehuda ben Alam. How do we know that one is obligated to tear kriya when it comes to Are Yehuda, which is quoted in Shulchan Aruch? So says the Gemara, Dechsiv. People left Shechem, Shiloh, and Shomron to come to Yerushalayim. They didn't even know that the Beis Hamikdash had been destroyed yet. Shmonim ish, begul chezaka, and they straightened their beards. And then all of a sudden, I saw what was going on. And then they saw the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed. They tore their clothes, and they had cuts in their flesh. They were planning on bringing a korban. They didn't even know the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed. They walked out. That's how they found out the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed. They walked up. They saw the flames. So that's how we know that they tore their clothes. So therefore, one is obligated to tear kriya. Am Rabbi Chalba, Am Rabbi Ula Bira, Am Rabbi Elazar. Haroa Are Yehuda b'Chorbanon. A person sees the mountains of Yehuda without the Beis Hamikdash being built b'Chorbanon. So then they should say this pasuk: Omer Are Kochecha Hayu Midbar. These holy cities have become a desert. V'Korea, and then they should tear. These psukim, I believe, almost all of them, if not all of them, are quoted in Shulchan Aruch. Yerushalayim b'Chorbanon. If a person sees Yerushalayim in its destructed state, Omer Tzion midbar hayasa, that Tzion is now a desert. Yerushalayim shemama, Yerushalayim is desolate. V'Korea, then he should tear. What about Beis Hamikdash b'Chorbano? Omer Beis Kodshenu v'Sifartenu asher hilalucha avosenu hayalisreifas eish. It has become a pile of rubble. It's been burnt down to the ground. And all of the things that we loved, all the things that we appreciated, they have all been destroyed. And then Korea. Now let's get back into some of the actual dinim. This was a little agarta and some halachic background gemaras. Korea al mikdash umosif al Yerushalayim. We said at the brisa that we started with at the top of the page of this amud. It's a long amud. So the brisa said that you can tear for the mikdash and then add to the kera, add to the tear al Yerushalayim. Says the Gemara, that's not so simple. Or we have a brisa that says you're not allowed to have one tear adding to the other when it comes to the Beis Hamikdash. Why not? Or the brisa writes, Echad hashomea be'echad haroa. If one hears about Yerushalayim or if one sees, Keman sheigia letzofim. Once they get to tzofim, they have to tear. Korea. The Korea al mikdash bifnei atzma v'al Yerushalayim bifnei atzma. The Gemara says explicitly in a brisa that the mikdash gets its own tear and Yerushalayim gets its own tear. So don't say that you're allowed to do one and make a little additional little tear. That's not right. The brisa doesn't agree, so we have a conflict in brises. The Gemara says, "Lo kasha hada paga b'mikdash bereisha, hada paga b'Yerushalayim bereisha." Depends. If you see the mikdash first, then you tear for one and then the other. And if you see Yerushalayim first, and then you tear one, and then you can add to the kera. Tanu Rabban, and the rabbis have taught us v'chulan. In all of these cases where we say ein misachin, that one is not allowed to do a perfect stitching job to bring things back to normal, you can do a light type of stitching. Molalan is where you take the fabric and instead of connecting the fabric like this, you kind of roll the fabric and there's like a little bump and you stitch through the fabric like side by side. You kind of folded it up like this. And then while it's up, you stitch through the fabric. So that's called molalan. And then ulaloktan is when you take all the fabric and you put one stitch through all of the loose parts. That doesn't always work, depends on the tear. Ulaloktan, asosam can mean sulmos, to make them like ladders, where the stitching is on the front, you have a showing showing lateral stitch, and then the under one is the angle up, and then another lateral stitch, and it looks like a ladder when you're done. It's like shoelaces. Sometimes when you get the shoelaces out of the box, they do that really funky lacing that nobody really knows what to do with them when they come out of the box. Most people don't wear their shoes like that, but it looks like a ladder. So that's what the stitching looks like in all of these cases. Says the Gemara, you're not allowed to be misach, and you're not allowed to make perfect stitching, but you can do these temporary types of stitching, no problem. But you can't do permanent stitching. Rav Chizda says, top of Chavav Amud Beis, we're going to be going until the 2 dots 5 lines from the bottom. The Gemara says only uvi ichui Alexandri. The only type of ichui that we're not allowed to do is ichui Alexandri. What's ichui Alexandri? So it says the Gemara, and it says the Balei Tosfos, the top Tosfos, uvi ichui Alexandri, Birushalmi, ezu ichui kol she'ein mekomo nikar. Wow, you need to be a real talent. You can tear your clothes and restitch it so that it's unnoticeable. Wow, that's a very, very high standard. It also means that we can do whatever the heck we want with our, it doesn't matter. There's no way you're going to get it to look like it did originally. It's not even possible. That's one. The only thing I can think of is if you tear something that's made out of yarn and you have the same exact yarn thread, you could probably get away with it. But our threads are so small. I mean, it's not just you have to be a bucky. It's impossible. It's impossible. It's impossible. But the Tosfos has a second sheet too. Maseches smachos, the farish kol she'achuhu kol tzarcho. No, it's enough that you'd be able to say I'm willing to wear it. So let's assume that's what kol tzarcho means. That may require some poskim and meforshim. But that point is that when the Gemara says of ichui Alexandri, what we're saying is that the standard of ichui Alexandri, of the permanent stitching, is one that is really, really high level. Okay, Tanu Rabbanan, top of the page. Let's say that you did one of these temporary stitches. HaKorea, if one had an obligation to do kriya, and they did so against a fabric that already had these poorly sewn stitches, mitoch hashalal, mitoch hamalal, mitoch haleket, mitoch hasulamos, any of these 4 types of temporary low-level stitching, if you tore kriya on those, lo yatsa. Why lo yatsa? Because they don't even count in the first place. We said that you're not allowed to do a permanent stitching. You can do these. These aren't stitches. They're not halachic stitches. So if you tear on that, that's not kriya. You have to tear on a better piece of fabric. Amar Rav Chizda, but had it been permanent stitching, then yatsa, then you would be yotze. And on this, the Gemara qualifies as it did before with the same amora, 3-4 lines down. Chavav Amud Amar Rav Chizda, uveichui Alexandri. So says the Gemara, another application of these halachos of kriya. Tanu Rabbanan Rishai lahavcho lamatu v'la'achoso. So the way that their clothing was made is that they were basically tubes, and they'd wear a belt, and they would do something at the top to make it stay on their shoulders, but they were reversible top to bottom, where you'd wear your head over here. It can also be worn upside down. So says the Gemara, according to the Tanakama of this brisa, Rishai, it's permissible to take the top where you tore the kriyas, flip it to the bottom. So now that's the lower hem, and then those you can be la'achoso. Those you are allowed to stitch perfectly. Reb Shimon ben Elazar disagrees. Asar la'achoso. And now another din in this brisa, just like if a person is selling their own clothing to another person. So let's say a person sat shiva, they have a garment, a very expensive, nice garment, and when they stitch it up, it's perfectly beautiful, usable. They can make a couple $100. You're not allowed to do that. So even if you buy it, it's permanent. You know, sometimes people say like, "Oh, I got this wonderful insurance with my car. It comes with the car." So this comes with the beged. Whoever owns the beged, as many sales as it takes, that beged can never be fully permanently fixed. That is the shita of Reb Shimon ben Elazar. Therefore, you have to put a sign up in the Goodwill section of the store saying these have been torn for the death of a parent. You're not allowed to tie them up. You're not allowed to stitch them up. Tanu Rabbanan. Tchilas kriya tefach. The initial kriya has to be a tefach. The tosefes, and if you're going to add to that kriya and do an additional kriya at that spot, shalosh etzbaos divrei Reb Meir. It needs to be another 3 finger breadths. Says the Gemara, not everybody agrees. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, tchilas kriya shalosh etzbaos. It's a smaller shiur. Rabbi Yehuda says the initial kriya has to be 3 etzbaos. The tosefes koldahu, and we have to add. If we're going to add, then any extra kriya can be even a koldahu, even a little bit. And Ula says we take a little bit from Reb Meir and a little bit from Rabbi Yehuda. Amar Ula, 12 lines down. Chavav Amud Beis. Amar Ula. Halacha ke Reb Meir b'kriya. Halacha is like Reb Meir with kriya, that the tchila, that the first tear has to be at least a tefach. The halacha ke Reb Yehuda b'tosefes, and the halacha is like Reb Yehuda when we do a second kriya on that spot, which is that we have to add at a minimum a kol shehu. That's it, but nothing else. We don't have to do 3 finger breaths. And in fact, a later brisa paskin like this, Tanya Nami Hachi, the brisa writes, Rabbi Yossi Omer, tchilas kriya tefach b'tosefes kol shehu. Well, beautiful. So that's seemingly how the Gemara concludes. Fine. The following Gemara is when people have Nebuch, they have stacked Aveluses one on top of the other. They just did a Kriya for one person, and now they have to do a Kriya for another. Or Rachmana litzlan, Hashem should bench us and keep us safe, that if collections of people of a family pass away at the same time, what happens? So let's see. So the Gemara says about a third of the way down, quarter of the way down, Tana Rabbana. Amru lo meis aviv v'kara. They tell a person that his father has passed away, and then he tears Kriya. Okay, and then Nebuch Meis Beno, then his child passes away, Vahosif, and he adds on to that Kriya. So each part of the Kriya is a little bit different. Tachton, Misache, the lower part of the Kriya, which was torn on his son, that Misache, you're allowed to stitch back to perfection because it's a child and not a parent. Elyon, but the first section where you began the Kriya, which was for a parent, Eino Misache. What about the reverse? Meis Beno, Vikara. First, he hears that his son passed away, so he tore Kriya. Meis Aviv v'hosiv, and then his father Nebuch passed away, and he added to the Kriya. So then Elyon Misacha, the upper part can be torn, can be fixed perfectly, and Tachton Einu Misacha, but the lower part, which again the rules apply. It's very strange the Gemara adds both of these. It should just be obvious. One should be implicit. What about the following awful scenario? Meis Aviv, Mesa Imo, Meis Achiv, Mesa Achoso. 4 people die: father, mother, brother, and sister. Korea kera echad lekulan. The Tanna Kama holds that one kriya covers everybody. It's not the way we would probably paskin. Omer al kulan kara echad. With everyone other than the parents, they get one kriya. Al avi ve'imo kara echad. They get their own kera. Why? Lifi she'ein mosifin al kera avi ve'imo. Unlike the previous cases where the deaths were sequential, and therefore when there was first a death for a parent and then subsequently a death of another person in the family, fine, there you can have one tear going into another. But when you're doing one kriya to represent multiple people, you cannot have a tosefes. You cannot have an intention of tosefes when one of those people who died is a parent. My taima, Amar Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak Lefi she'enan b'tosefes. Parents are not even involved in this sugya, they're on the next level. Amar Shmuel halacha Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira. We paskin like Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira that we have to do 2 kriyos. Says the Gemara, how can Shmuel say that? We've heard Shmuel kicking and screaming throughout the Masechta about the fact that we have to follow Divrei HaMekel Ba'avel. So why are you saying you have to do 2 kriyos instead of 1? You could have been lenient, Shmuel. Mi Amar Shmuel, hachi, last short line. Amar Shmuel halacha Divrei HaMekel Ba'avel. Why would you tell me, Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira, that the brother and sister who passed away, they get one kriya? The mother and father who passed away, they get a separate kriya. That's not right. That's not divrei hamekel be'avel. You're being strict on the family, and you're telling the avel he has to tear twice. So it says the Gemara, an unbelievable idea. It's so hard to comprehend this. Avelus l'chud, kriya l'chud. Afal pi, that the only reason we're tearing kriya is because of avelus, but the halachos of avelus and the halachos of kriya are not one and the same. You can't apply, says the Gemara, implies the Gemara, you can't apply the principle of holech kedivrei hamekel be'avel in regards to hilchos kriya. Your question's off base. They are separate cuts of halacha, and therefore one is not allowed to extend Shmuel's desire to be lenient to the world of kriya. A very interesting lumdus idea to speak about as to how can we possibly separate kriya from avelus. That's the only time we have, I guess, other scenarios, but it's very specific to when somebody dies. Nevertheless, that's what the Gemara concludes. How much is a person allowed to tear down their garment? Let's say they're starting at the top of their shirt. So then how much can they tear? Ad tiburo, until their belly button. V'yesh omrim ad libo. Some say up only to their heart, and then if they needed to tear again, they'd have to move to another part of their shirt. And afal pishein raya ladavar zeichel ladavar. Shneimar v'kir levavchem ve'al bigdeichem. The one should tear to their heart. Anyway, according to the initial shita of until the belly button, higia letiburo. Let's say you've torn kriya multiple times on the same garment, and you got down to the belly button. What should you do? So marchik shalosh etzbos v'korea. So you're going to move over 3 etzbos from the initial tear, and then you're going to start another set of tears, as many as is necessary, 3 tefach apart, 3 etzbos apart v'korea. Nismale lefanov. Let's say that a person tears kriya here, and then three etzbos later across the shirt, let's call it an inch and a half, whatever it is, every inch and a half, they have a full row of tears. So then what you can do is machzir la'achorav, turn the shirt around, and then start tearing in the front. Once you do the front and the back, the whole top of the shirt is all torn up from all of the nebach. What a terrible scenario. All of the types of kriyas you had to do. So then hofcha milamata, you can flip the tunic that you're wearing so that the torn parts are now by your feet. And the non-torn parts, which was the bottom, is now the top. Flip it around. And at the same time, the Gemara points out a very important halacha. And just to be accurate, let me just make sure I'm right about this. Yes, this is quoted in Shulchan Aruch. If you tear at the side of your clothing, or if you tear below the belly button, seemingly below the belly button, you're not yotze. Ela shekohen gadol poreim milamata. Only a kohen gadol would be in that scenario where he's not allowed to halachically tear his clothes. That's a pasuk in Lo Sifrom, where he's not allowed to tear his clothes. But when he wants to tear, he does not chayav to. But if he wants to, he can. But it would be at the bottom of his clothes. Pligi bar Rav Masno mar ukva b'tarvai mishmei da'avur d'Shmuel v'Levi. Rav Masna and Marukva had a machlokas in the name of the father of Shmuel and Levi. Chad Amar Kol Shiva Korea, that throughout Shiva, if one has a need to tear again, they can tear again. They can do another kriya. And La'achar Shiva Mosif. After Shiva, they don't tear a new kriya. After Shiva, they're mosif. They add that kol shu to the initial kara. V'chad Amar, someone says, no, the measure is not 7 days. V'chad Amar Kol Shloshim Korea, that when it comes to Shloshim, one can do a fresh kriya, and la'achar shloshim mosif. And if one gets out of their shloshim, and then they have yet another chiyuv to tear kriya, so then that they could just be mosif to an existing kara, to an existing tear. Says the Gemara 3/4 of the way down, maski flor zera. Manda Amar Kol Shiva Korea, according to the Shita that holds that you're allowed to add another full kara, full tear during Shiva for another need. Amai, why is that true? Delo nitan l'shololo, because during Shiva you're not allowed to do that temporary sewing, so therefore you have to do another kara. There's nothing. What are your other options? So it says the Gemara, if that's true, Elahada Amar Mar, there's a woman where that's not true. Elahada Amar Mar Haisha Shalalto La'altar. A woman, we already learned this in Maseches Moed Kattan earlier, that wasn't that long ago. It feels like it was long ago. Nope, 4 days ago. Wow, okay, that's embarrassing. So says the Gemara, Ha'isha shalalto la'altar. We said that a woman is allowed to do shlila on the day of, right when she does the tear. So she tears the undershirt, of course, in private. She flips it around, and then she tears the outer garment, and she can put a safety pin in. We said it wasn't covered for a woman to walk around that way. So if that's true, if Ha'isha shalalto la'altar, so then hachanami, she should be able to be mosif and not have to tear a new kara. Says the Gemara, you can't learn from there. Hasa mishum kavod ishahu. That's not because of a din in kriya. That's because of a din in kvod isha. It's not appropriate, even though she's covered. It's not appropriate for a woman to walk around with her clothes torn. It's not. What about this new style? Some jeans come pre-torn, some shirts come pre-torn. It's like a thing. I don't know. My mother, when I was growing up, couldn't understand that. Mrs. Karesh would not.
I can argue with that.
Yeah, no. Yeah, we don't buy I think maybe one of my babies had one of those pairs of jeans that kind of was like the pre-worn, pre-torn jeans. Anyways, it's not appropriate for a woman to do that. So therefore, you can't learn anything from there because it wasn't the din in kriya. So we would still say she can tear a new kriya during Shiva. No, she would not be mosif. And man damar kol shloshim korea, according to the one who says that for all 30 days, we would do a full new kara, a full new tear and not be mosif. Amai, what's the reason why? Because the lo nitan la'achoso, because during that time, you're not allowed to properly fix it. So it says the Gemara, maybe we should say that for a parent, the halacha should be different during shloshim, because that parent, you can never ever fix that kara. Says the Gemara, nope, that's not right. There's a secondary factor. It's not primary to the halachos of avelus. It's because of kibbud avayim, and therefore you cannot bring a raya from there to change the din. Couple more sugyas. Tanu Rabbanu. Beged karua lifnei hameis. If a person walks out in a pre-torn clothing, right? So let's say that you already wore the shirt and you tore kriya on it for another halachic reason, and you wear that lifnei hameis. Hareze goes alas hamesim besachayim. That's terrible. It's a double knock. The mesim, what do they know? I don't know, but it seems from the Gemara that the mason might think you tore kriya on them. Really, you already tore kriya, and you're stealing from the chayim as well. That the people who are alive are looking at you and said, "Wow, look at this person. He tore kriya." Maybe not. They also may misunderstand your obligation to tear kriya. Rashba Gomer, Let's say that a person says to his friend, I'd like to borrow your shirt. I'm going to visit, the person says he's going to visit his father, and his father is sick. And then when the shoel gets there, so even though it's not my shirt and I borrowed it from you, I can tear it and I have to restitch it. When you get home, you have to give back the chaluk, you have to give back the shirt, and then you have to give it back and the difference in cost. So let's say without the tear, the shirt was $30, and with the tear, the shirt's $25. You have to give back the reduction in cost of what you've done. Why is it that we are allowed to do this? Why am I allowed to tear someone else's shirt? So the Gemara says, because you told the guy where you were going. You were going to visit someone who was sick and dying that was a karov. So he knew there was a chance you'd have to tear it. But had he not informed you of the illness, so then hareze lo yigabo, that's not right. Then you're not allowed to do that. So that's why some of the poskim say by Yerushalayim, if a person says, I'm going to Yerushalayim, can I borrow your shirt so that I don't have to tear kriya? So some poskim say that doesn't work. You told the guy you're going to tear kriya. So he knows that when you go to the kosel that you're going to tear kriya. So you borrowed a shirt, so what? That's too bad. You still have to tear kriya and give it back to him stitched up and pay the difference in price. That's what the Gemara says. If he knows where you're going, and that place where you're going has a chiyuv kriya, you got to tear kriya. It's not a heter. So that's why some poskim don't like this whole flipperoo. I'm going to wear your shirt, you're going to wear mine. We're going to go to the kosel, we'll give back our shirts afterwards. No, no, tear kriya. And if you borrowed someone's shirt, b'da'as, that they knew when you borrowed it, that the mash'il knew that you're borrowing to go to the kosel, l'chor, you'd still have to tear kriya. Tanu Rabbanan, cholesh shemeis lameis, if there's a person who's ill, and that person lost a loved one, ein modian oso shemeis. We don't tell them right away that their loved one has passed away. Shema titarev daito alav, because they might go a little crazy. They're already sick as it is, it might make them worse. Vein mekarim b'fanav, we don't tear in front of him. Umeshaskin es hanoshim mipanav, we make sure that the women who may not necessarily have known this halacha as clearly as the men did back in the day, so then we'd make sure that they don't talk about it. When it comes to children, we saw this earlier, Kattan on nefesh, that a child does have, we do tear kriya if a child becomes an avel. We do tear kriya, but not because the child has a din of avelus. Ktanim don't have a din of avelus. It's only agmas nefesh to make the room more emotional. The korea al chama al chamos mibnei korishto. One should tear kriya if his in-laws pass away for the honor of his wife. We learn in Evo Rabasi, in the Medrash, you should not let a person who's an avelus hold a baby, because that will lead them to bring extensive happiness. That's not right. That's not right. Too much simcha. This is very, very difficult. Very difficult when you're in a shiva house and somebody has a cute little baby. It's like a respite for 5 minutes. It's not allowed. Shulchan Aruch quotes this as well. We're going to stop right here. Hashem should bless us from all of these dangers. Our family should be safe and healthy and well at Me'av Esrim Shana. We'll stop right here. Mirza Hashem will pick up tomorrow. Yeah, I'll be here tomorrow night. We'll learn Daf Chav Zayin, and then Wednesday I'll also be here actually. And I think we're just going to finish the parak on that night. But finish the parak and the Masechta on that night. And we're going to ask about when the siyum can be. We might push it off to match David's father's yortzeit. We'll get back to that soon. All right. Have a good night, everybody. Kol tu.